Hi, I'm Mark Sleboda, and this is The Real Politick. For the first 7 months of the Russian intervention or special military operation, the Russian military, strangely to U.S. defense officials, avoided any systemic attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. But after repeated Kiev regime attacks on electrical infrastructure in the Donbass, where it had already been a regular target for 8 years of civil conflict, as well as in Crimea and Belgorod in Russia, and after the suicide bombing of the Kerch Bridge to Crimea, this all changed starting October 10th. Since then, the new overall commander of the Russian SMO, General Armageddon Surovikin, has launched a sustained and systemic air campaign using cruise missiles and kamikaze drones to cripple Ukrainian electrical infrastructure. After the most recent large Russian salvo of over 100 missiles in mid-November, Kiev regime officials report that over 50% of Ukraine's electrical infrastructure is out of order, and they may not be able to repair and recover after any further such strikes. This has resulted in much of the country being left without electricity or water for days at a time. Turns out you need electricity to pump water, as well as regular rolling blackouts, and calls by Kiev regime officials for the potential evacuation of the capital of Kiev, and even further for all Ukrainians who can to just leave the country in order to reduce electrical demand on the heavily damaged system. Now, Western governments and media ubiquitously refer to the attacks on Ukrainian electrical infrastructure by Russia as barbaric, hypocritically and selectively forgetting or ignoring every war that they have fought in the modern era. Indeed, the U.S. Air Force has long favored destroying opponents' electrical power systems and dual-use infrastructure as among the first priorities in any conflict. Electrical power has been considered a critical target for the U.S. in every war, since they're targeting electrical infrastructure in Germany and Japan in World War II. So in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq, Serbia, and Libya. The U.S. Department of Defense's own Law of War of Manual declares, electric power stations are generally recognized to be of sufficient importance to a state's capacity to meet its wartime needs of communication, transport, and industry, so as usually to qualify as legitimate military objectives during armed conflicts. But as usual, it's different when we do it. And despite the Western media's bleeding, crocodile tears, and obfuscation, the principal stated Russian rationale in attacking Ukrainian electrical infrastructure is actually inhibiting the logistics and communications of the Kiev regime's military. Since NATO opened the flood valves of weapons, money, intelligence, and training, the conflict in Ukraine has become a proxy conflict of attrition and logistics. Moving troops and military equipment quickly across large fronts and transporting the massive quantities of shells, ammunition, fuel, and other supplies that they need is paramount. Now, the rail network in Ukraine is the principal means of doing this. Roads are just not sufficient for anything more than local troop movements, and the fuel costs are enormous. The majority of the trains in Ukraine are powered by electricity. So you take out the electricity, you take out the trains, and thus the entire military logistics chain. Troops can't move, can't get the fuel or ammunition or the supplies they need to function and fight. The Russian Ministry of Defense described the results of the most recent Russian airstrikes on Ukrainian electrical infrastructure as Ukraine's military has suffered a serious degradation of capabilities. Transportation of manpower and material towards the front lines via railroads has been hampered to a large degree. Production at Ukrainian military industrial facilities has also been disrupted. Now, the Ukrainian electrical generation and distribution network is Soviet legacy, i.e. node-centric and robust with massive redundancies and channels for rerouting power. But Russian forces are not resorting to mass carpet bombing to take it out. They know this system. Soviet engineers built it, after all, And Ukrainian officials report that electrical experts are guiding Russian strikes to clinically achieve the desired result with minimal casualties, as has been obvious from the media reports that a salvo of 100 missiles at a time results in only a handful of civilian deaths and injuries. According to Ukrainian energy officials, Russian strikes are not aimed at generating facilities to prevent us from producing electricity, but at connection systems tied to the Ukrainian energy system. They are aimed at open switchgears, transformers, switches, so that a station that can produce electricity cannot be connected to the unified power system. So the Russian military doesn't aim to permanently destroy the Ukrainian electrical infrastructure, but to systemically dissect it for the desired result, with Ukrainian electrical workers eventually running out of the transformers and supplies, mostly built by Russia, capable of performing the needed repairs for the course of the conflict. Now, obviously, there is a substantial secondary effect on the civilian population as well, with knocking out the electrical power needed to support modern life. I refer once again to the US DoD's Law of War Manual, which points out that attacks that are otherwise lawful are not rendered unlawful if they happen to result in diminished civilian morale. It then goes on to cite with approval a 2002 commentary about NATO's war on Serbia from a former DoD general counsel regarding the strikes on Serbian electrical infrastructure. I will readily admit that aside from directly damaging the military electrical power infrastructure, NATO wanted the civilian population to experience discomfort so that the population would pressure Milosevic and the Serbian leadership to accede to the UN Security Council resolution. But the intended effects on the civilian population are secondary to the military advantage gained by taking out the electrical power infrastructure. The effect on Ukrainian civilians here is also directly analogous to the Western existential economic war of sanctions they are waging on Russia, with the intent of making the Russian people suffer so much that they rise up in the streets to pressure their own government to change policy, or to overthrow it in order to alleviate their economic misery. Perhaps after being left without electricity, water, and normal modern life, the Ukrainian people will at last be inspired and motivated to rise up and overthrow the West-backed putsch regime, which seized power in Kiev in 2014. Or if not, maybe millions more Ukrainians fleeing as refugees to Western states will destabilize them, and cost them so much economically and politically that the ruling elite will change foreign policy course and end the flow of arms and financial aid to their client regime in Kiev, and return to diplomatic negotiations. With this new Russian strategy of clinically targeting Ukrainian electrical infrastructure, whether military, economically, or politically, it's lights out for the Kiev regime.